We are live on YouTube. This is the Wednesday, May 23rd meeting of the Node.js modules team. And I'm going to hand it off to John David Dalton, who is going to be chairing today's meeting.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sound great.
Sweet, cool. I've had to switch the client to the other computer instance so I could save on resources. So it looks like we don't have quorum yet. So the current PRs for members we'll have to defer until either later on in the meeting, probably towards the end, to see if we reach quorum then. So then that leaves discussion of time-boxed items. So just going down the list, we can look at the first one here. Let's see, it says historical decisions and documents terminology for 119 or for 119. Who wants to lead that? I believe, let's open it and see who is requesting this. And
yeah, so like I basically put the initiative, like I made the issue. Basically, I'm struggling to catch up with what I missed over the past 3 weeks. So it made me realize that a lot of terminology is what is intended, but then that gets miscommunicated a lot. So I think putting some terminology in place can help, you know, in the future, and it could also help with the discussions so that, you know, saying one word means something we agree upon. So yeah, like definitely I'm willing to be part of this initiative.
is this like just a wiki page or something like that?
Yeah, like it would be a document. So whatever format the team prefers, I think it could be a markdown file, part of the repo, and we can all collaborate. But I do recommend at least 2 human beings work on it, because definitions tend to not make sense if they're, you know, just written by one individual, and they make a lot more sense if more people are involved.
Okay. All right. Well, are you volunteering to be one of those individuals?
Definitely, yes.
Okay, that's cool. All right.
One thing that I think could maybe go really well, apologies for not raising the hand, I'm not able to right now. But one thing that could really work, Salah, if you started by even just making a doc that had the things you think need to be defined for yourself as someone who's new to the group, who doesn't know as many things, that document can be shared, and then people can just start filling in the blanks. So if we just kind of maybe start a Google Doc on that, that seems like a reasonable way to get it started. Does anyone think that that works?
I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I'm up for that.
Awesome, thank you. And then, yeah, we can definitely get some other people, like there's some other new observers, and maybe that could be like a nice onboarding thing we can do. When you join the team, you have to read the doc, and anything you don't have answers to has to be added to the doc.
Yeah. And I guess, yeah, like the terminology in the docs is like the guide for any discussions. So that would definitely help. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? Looking for hands. One raised hand. Jeffrey.
Yeah, I was just going to add historical decisions can easily be obviously a source of contention if, like, obviously people disagree with whatever decision was made. So we might want to just tread carefully there of, like, you know, this is what was discussed, this is what was decided, but, you know, basically until something is released, any decision could be revisited. So it shouldn't be presented as like this was decided 3 years ago and we all must abide by it. So.
Okay. I was looking at that too. Let's see, raised hand, Salah?
Yeah, I think more importantly, from my perspective, the terminology comes first. Like the historical decisions, I think this evolves depending on the needs. But something as simple as writing ES6 or ESM or ES modules could actually mean different things. If it's part of a terminology that is well defined to refer to modules before they were actually, real modules, then versus modules after they are actually implemented, for instance. So I think my focus really would be more on terminology.
Okay.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. All right. So moving on to the next item.
Just to interrupt really quickly, sorry, but we have quorum right now, so maybe we could quickly approve those PRs.
Sure. No one jump off, please. Okay, so we're going to look at the first PR here, which is move Jeffrey to from observer to member status. I guess I will say, is everyone okay with that? Do we have any objections? Okay, speak now. I don't see anyone with a hand raised to talk, so we'll go ahead and say that that is quorum. So that's good. If someone can merge that, that would be cool.
I'll take care of merging and updating the GitHub stuff.
Well, good. Then we'll move on to the next one, which is Kevin Smith. So this is number 88. Kevin Smith would like to be moved or would like to be added to an observer as an observer. So again, the question's raised if everyone's okay with that. And I don't see any comments here, which means that it's going to be okay. So Kevin will be added as an observer, and Jeffrey will be moved to an active member. Cool. Okay, great. Now on to developer survey. This has got a 5-minute time box here. And it looks like Miles may be leading this one.
Yes, hi. So my thoughts on this were mostly along the lines of
Oh.
What? Everything okay?
Sounds like somebody just sneezed.
Oh. And we've got an echo going on. So the short version of what I was hoping to, oh, JD, did you just join again? Well, I'm going to keep talking. The short idea that I had here is, one thing that we've talked about a couple times when going through stuff here has been discussing users and discussing, what are the expectations of people? What would they like? What would they not like? How would they want things to be done? We represent a number of different communities, and we have a number of different use cases and individuals. So, we do have a group within Node that's doing active user feedback, and the foundation itself has done a number of different things regarding outreach and user feedback. So I was thinking that perhaps we could put together a survey, we could put it out, and I think the balance will be coming up with questions that are not too leading, but essentially trying to get some questions out there so we can test some of our hypotheses. A really great example would be like the transparent interop. A lot of us think it will be better for some experience, some think it will be worse for others. I think doing some actual user research there could show some good stuff. I guess I'll just leave it to the floor. I don't know if we really need to discuss at length. I just wanted to make sure people were aware of it. And if there were any objections to doing this, I wanted to make sure they had an opportunity to talk. So we got some hands up. We got Hassan.
Good. Yeah, good day. Good day. Good day. Am I live?
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
We can no longer hear you if you're speaking, Hassan. In the meantime, Hassan, I'm going to get Guy to speak, and just raise your hand again when your microphone's working. Guy?
Sure, let me know if you can hear me okay as well. Also on a far connection here. Just with regards to that, just saying that it would be good that we, as you mentioned with the example, understand what goals we're looking to achieve from the survey, and have some idea of the sort of objectives we have in mind, and maybe discuss that, just that it's a clear part of the process.
Okay. JD, I think you're next.
Cool. I was just going to say we could have the JS Foundation or the Node Foundation help broadcast that survey out as well, to get more eyeballs on it.
Yeah, and I think that that's definitely something that we could do. I would like to see us pair with the user feedback initiative group to put this together and then have it promoted by the different foundations. Brad, your hand is up.
Yeah, so you briefly mentioned bias. I do agree it's going to be extremely hard to not create biased questions for a lot of this. A decent amount of stuff we're starting to talk about is getting to technical causes of why some things are difficult. In the same thing, I want to know kind of the overall effect that this survey will have. Are we bound by this survey? Are we kind of beholden to do whatever the most popular opinion is? Learning expectations is good, but becoming bound to expectations is something I would like to prevent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm imagining that this isn't something that we'll be bound to. I'm imagining that this is primarily going to be something. I just want to, like, when we're talking about users and when we're going to discuss users and use users' opinions as a mean to discuss an argument, I want us to have something physical that we can use. It doesn't mean that that makes us beholden to it, but I just want to use evidence and user research rather than exposition and feelings, if that makes sense.
So you used a slightly different word than I did. I'm more concerned with expectations. A lot of the opinions that are going to be coming out are actually just going to be their expectations, I believe, unless we are very, very careful about how we do this. And expectations are very different from opinions. Expectations are, oh, it's going to work a specific way, not, oh, alternatives are bad. Yeah. They're existing knowledge, not a survey of all possibilities.
Yeah, and I was imagining it would be a question like, and maybe we need to spin off like a separate group to put together a proposal as to what this survey could look like. And the biggest challenge will be keeping these questions from being leading. And I think by avoiding leading questions, we can avoid the questions themselves setting expectations.
That's it.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, if I could just second this, I think it's way better to find out users' expectations before we release something rather than after putting something out there in beta or otherwise and getting a torrent of criticism back. So, I mean, yes, I agree. There's obviously this can be fraught with peril if not handled well, but also the alternative of not doing it can also be pretty bad too.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. We are now up to the next time-boxed item, which is questions for the TC39. There's several TC39 members in attendance of the meeting today. So if anyone has questions, you can ask now with raised hands.
The biggest reason I thought to put this on the agenda was, you know, we still have some time. There's a dinner tonight and there's a whole day of meetings tomorrow. So if there's specific questions that people would like me to socialize or talk to people about, I definitely can. Lynn Clark just gave a really great talk about loading different runtimes. So there's a whole thing that they're looking into for WASM, specifically in potentially creating a second instantiation subphase. So I'm going to be talking to her and the Mozilla team to see if something like that could actually be used for importing common JS and named exports. Like if that could be used for a similar thing. They don't think so, but we'll explore it. John, your hand is up.
Hello. All right, cool. One question I have for them is, so we just got through the whole array flatten thing, and it's now been renamed to array flat to avoid collisions with the ecosystem and prototypal method names. Is there been discussion on avoiding that in the first place through either built-in modules, which I think Dominic DiNicola has been against, or like scoped, like safe modules for prototypal additions, or some kind of mechanism to avoid this like MooTools biting us again for these things? And if so, could something be mirrored for the Node ecosystem for things like NPM packages that we run into collisions with as well?
So Jordan just pinged me in IRC to add the note that we'll always need things to be polyfillable. So this problem is not solvable by built-in modules. There have been discussions, not at this meeting, but at the previous meeting regarding built-ins. And essentially, it doesn't seem like it's moving forward, but there is an interest. But the recommendation that was given to Node was to just move forward with it. And I think with the discussion that we're having in the pull request for Brotli, I think we just want to move forward with an Node.js namespace. That's something that's like mirrors what's being used in the ecosystem anyways right now. And if built-ins end up in the platform using a different identifier, we can support both. It's, you know, not the most elegant way to move forward, but I don't think we need to block our movement on the ecosystem moving forward. Brad?
So there's a separate proposal from built-in modules actually coming out of the web platform. And it looks like it's going to be proposed by Dominic DiNicola eventually to TC39. It's a way to get the original descriptor for a realm, which is what Node generally calls contexts, and some path to a value. So you could do like get original descriptor buffer. And if it's globally reachable, you could get access to it. So that's being looked at one way. For the poisoning problem, we've spent several talks today kind of about security, which is somewhat related to robustness. And we're talking about reinitializing the frozen realms route by moving forward with realms. And that would be a way to prevent prototype poisoning and that sort of stuff. It still won't prevent MooTools from shooting themselves in the foot because we can't have the outermost realm be frozen. But there are a variety of avenues being looked at. Yes.
Nice. Any other questions? Raised hands?
Hassan did mention before jumping, like it sounds like they're running low on network, but they just want to say that regarding the developer survey stuff earlier, that it will perform as a platform to elaborate more on how users will really work with modules. And I'll add that to the notes. I think that's a great point, Hassan.
Okay. Let's see. We have, for the next section, if there's no other questions to bring up, feel free though, too, if you have questions after the meeting, to ping the TC39 members that are part of the module working group. If you are a TC39 member, maybe it's not quite visible enough. If you could reply to that issue and just let folks know in the module working group that you are a member, so they'll know who to ping in or ask questions to. I guess they could also just ask questions in the thread, but it's nice to let folks know who's in what groups. So. The next the next thing is a transparent interop for ESM importing CommonJS, and this was transparent or not interop, which was the issue I opened. This is time boxed for 15 minutes. That's going to be interesting. Jeffrey?
We can change the time boxes, by the way. If you want to spend less time on use cases, because not everyone is here, we can spend more time on this.
Well, I think so. This will probably be something that Jeffrey, since he has the
yeah. So sorry, I have to leave right at 1 o'clock or 1 o'clock Pacific in 30 minutes. So, yeah, the only thing I wanted to talk about this at the meeting was just about splitting this into multiple features. Obviously, I feel like 15 minutes is way too little time to even begin to go into transparent interop. But I mean, if you want to go to the number 100 JDD to show people, this covered like 15 or maybe a dozen different use cases. So I was thinking of splitting this into multiple separate features. And I guess I can do it unless anyone wants to contribute
I would like
to that or whatnot.
I would like to object to that. I think that the splitting all the features into issues has created a lot of noise, and it's hard to keep track of everything. And I don't think that splitting those into multiple issues will actually help move the discussion forward.
Okay.
I'm open to being wrong on there. Please push back if you want, but like where we are right now, I even think that we should be folding in many of the issues that we have. This is just too hard to keep up. Brad?
I do agree that we have a plethora of issues now. But when we get to decision making, we need to kind of be able to pare down the discussion, because like Jeffrey is saying, these are very big topics. Even though we have many issues, they're still fairly large topics, each of them. So we don't have to do it right now, but we should think of some process for reaching conclusions on these, because they will probably be very lengthy, and eventually GitHub issues don't work so well once you get a certain number of comments.
Yeah. I think this goes back to one of those earlier discussions that we were having. Oh, Jan, you have your hands up. Sorry to interrupt, please.
The only thing I wanted to add is that it might make sense, especially for these bigger discussions, to have, for example, per GitHub issue, a Google Doc that just captures the discussions that have been going on and the current state, so that we can capture the different aspects of it in one document that has like a table of contents, and you can actually see it a lot better, I think, than if it would have been split up in multiple GitHub issues or as in one single issue.
Salah, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was going to recommend maybe if we use other features like the milestones and projects to try to keep things structured, not just everything in issues, and maybe some structure using those tools can help clarify a bit of the noise happening. It could also help us determine how many things relate to things like features or use cases or so on. Just a recommendation, because it seems that the discussions need to be separate. But having everything as an issue and having the same discussion potentially occur under more than one feature is going to be a lot more confusing now, and definitely a lot more down the road.
So adding on to what Salah just said, which is something that I think could be really helpful, and it was something I tried to propose, is each of these features by themselves, and like specifically the underlying mechanism of how they work. And a really great example of this is like when we talk about transparent interop and we start getting into named exports, we start getting into like the implementation of the module loader and the spec and what we can do and what we can't do. it easily turns into a really, really large rabbit hole, and it turtles into kind of like an infinite debate. But we don't have the premise of that discussion figured out yet. And so I really think that it's a little bit premature to be digging into implementation details of features, but that's hard because we can't really talk about the validity of features without the implementation details. And so I would like to suggest that perhaps we go a layer higher, which is, like what is the actual user experience that we're talking about, and how does that user experience, how do I as a developer approach it and engage? And the user experience that we discuss will in turn create a feature set, which will in turn serve to the use cases that we've served. I just think that breaking it down and digging in per use case before we know, per feature, before we know which features we actually are engaging in is premature.
Sorry, just to clarify, we're talking about domains really of features, not like specific aspects of the feature, but something like packages or NPM, like a very, very broad domain of where you would expect the use cases to be related to, basically.
Or I mean, partially a domain, and mostly I'm actually thinking about like a proposal of user experience. Because like, if we use transparent interop as an example, transparent interop is part of a larger user experience, which also involves how do we use multiple modules. It also involves how do we transition packages. It also involves how do we have custom loaders. And I don't know how we talk about the implementation of transparent interop by itself without all that context. Guy?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a sensible approach, because often with these relatively complex things, there's so many implications of implementation decisions that, like, one technical thing that we can be discussing can have a myriad of different implications, from the way that workflows are going to work on the web, to the way that bundlers have to work, to the way that NPM workflows are going to work, or whatever. So I think, fleshing out those stories for coherent features can make sense, because you can then explore all those avenues and say, well, if we do A, B, and C, we can create an experience that looks like this, and we can even prototype that in code and play with it ourselves. The only thing to be careful about that is that we can very quickly then end up with like 3 islands that don't really cohere, and then it becomes sort of a process of sort of trying to push one of these visions that we've created, when maybe there are middle grounds to be found as well, when you go back to that feature level. But definitely the approach sounds sensible to me.
Jeffrey?
So I think most of the features are already written from a like user story perspective, and I think the ones that aren't, probably should be. And then I'm thinking like maybe what we could do is like just maybe try to avoid I'm sorry, I forget who was saying it. To try to avoid discussing implementation whenever possible in these features, and just be like, this is the user story, and then maybe open new features for kind of like how we opened features for proposals. And then it's like, here's a proposal, I think I can do this, basically describing an implementation. And then we can like reference like, okay, so which of the features does this support or not, and why, etc. That might be better and lead to less noise in the features themselves. And then the discussion of the features themselves can be centered around more like, do we want to support this or not? Is this a user story that we, consider valid or not? Yeah, just a thought.
Jeff, would you be able to expand on that thought just in the notes? I didn't fully get it out as much as I would have liked to have. It looks like Guy is handing off to me. So Jeff, in responding to your point there about opening it, like the one thing that I really want to stress, like from my personal experience, I'm not looking at GitHub too much on the weekends and stuff. And I get some people only get to look at it on the weekends, so that's fine. But when close to 30 issues get opened over the weekend and each of those issues start creating their own conversations and going down their own paths of discussion, and then we talk about opening more, I can't keep track of it. I can't participate in the conversation. And it actually creates an island where the only people who are actually able to participate are those who can keep up with all the different threads and have the time to. And I don't want to push this so far that we find ourselves limiting the discussion. We definitely don't want to do that. We want to keep the discussion moving forward. But I'm concerned that the approach that we're taking right now is going to A, drive away a whole bunch of members that we have that don't have time to engage in all of these different threads, and B, is setting us up for large disagreements and turtling. And that's what I've observed over the last couple of days. I've observed a lot of conversations that are going into deep technical discussion, not talking about the really high level stuff. And I've had multiple people tell me that the amount of content that's coming through is just not tenable to keep up with. Guy, back to you.
I'm sorry. I'm just thinking maybe that if there's a way to focus these discussions, because we can't expect. I mean, well, some of the most fruitful discussions can happen when we have people being able to respond offline, putting thought to things, and having these kind of detailed discussions in the issue queues. So it seems like a really fruitful way to move discussions forward between these meetings. But maybe if we just try and guide the focus of those discussions during the periods between the meetings, and think clearly about what we want to prioritize every 2 weeks, or some way to kind of restrict that scope and guide it, definitely sounds sensible.
Yeah, and to be explicit, I don't want to see those conversations stop. What I do want to see if we can try to avoid, and this is a problem that we've had in Node in general, is that it can end up becoming a game of who can talk the longest, and then that's who wins. And people just slowly back out who aren't able to keep up with the pace. And that's not necessarily always a bad thing. It's just like, I don't know if that's what this group wants to have happen. And I'm concerned that our current setup is forcing that.
Okay. We have 15 minutes left, and there's a topic to be discussed, which is non-transparent interop. I figured this would be a good, it comes up from time to time. There was a blog post about 6 or 8 months ago that mentioned it, but I don't know if members have a full understanding of it. So I think it would be nice if Miles or anyone else wants to jump in and just kind of give a description about what is that, and why is it important to have non-transparent or transparent. And it seems to be this kind of important decision that's coming up that impacts how things are going to be handled from that.
Since you volunteered me, I can pick it up. Although I've been talking a lot this meeting, so if anyone else wants to, please do. And I'd like to suggest really quickly that perhaps we drop the use cases and just use the rest of our time to talk interop. Does that seem reasonable to everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. I can try to manage discussing interop, maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
So part of the problem here is exactly what we have open. We don't have great terminology on what transparent interop is. But there are generally, I think, 2 schools of thought that we generally talk about when we're phrasing something as transparent interop. And one is kind of the full compatibility with how Babel and TypeScript or whatever existing transpilers work today, for whatever flavor of transpiler is your favorite. So that's like absolutely zero changes required. And the other form or school of thought generally that I see is you're able to import things that are not ESM. So this is not really talking about WASM. It's not talking about HTML. It's talking about loading .node files and CommonJS files generally. So that's really what I define as transparent interop. Does anybody else have something on the scale they want to add?
I think one of the things that's important with the idea of transparent interop is that it has to do, in my personal opinion, primarily with like a user experience and specifically with transitionary user experience, as well as compatibility with with other runtimes such as Babel and prior expectations. Part of the idea and push from camps that are very in support of transparent interop is the idea that I should be able to npm install a module and import it and not have to know what I'm importing via a bare import, what kind of module that module exposes. Pardon? Cool. And so a transparent interop is a feature historically that Node has shipped. It's what we have right now, although it's semi-transparent in the sense that we don't allow you to, like, you can import any module and not know, but if you import .js, it must be CommonJS. If you want to import ESM, it must be .mjs, and that part is a little bit less transparent. Whereas I believe like the NPM proposal had, a way of allowing JS to work for both runtimes, but it involves a dual parser or something like that. I can't recall exactly how they implemented it. Wesley has their hand up, so I think it makes sense to punt to them.
Wes?
Great. I mean, so earlier you asked what transparent interrupt means to different people. For me, like what that's supposed to have meant and what the use cases that I submitted were for like just substitutability, the ability to like have an existing CommonJS package that has a reasonable API and be able to rewrite it in ESM and not break all of my consumers, barring some amount of acceptable edge cases. Like that just being possible, being able to replicate the same API in CommonJS and ESM, like as long as there is a significant, like a large enough overlap that I can actually migrate my users without having a large break is the important part.
We've got Rob here.
So just a clarifying question on that. Do you mean full bidirectional substitutability?
Honestly, from ESM, I care a little bit less. I mean, it'd be nice in ESM just because using the same import syntax for multiple things is a nice to have. But in CommonJS, it's a little bit more important because you want to be able to keep using the same libraries in CommonJS even as they update underneath you.
Right. So even if you have a CommonJS application that is requiring everything in, as those libraries gradually change over, there should be no impact on the app.
Yeah, that's the goal. I mean, okay. There are obviously some cases where like the module shape needs to be a little bit different because like CommonJS allows you to do silly things like replace the entire namespace object. And so if the CommonJS library made use of that, it needs to have one update where they add an additional entry point where you don't have to use the replaced namespace so that you can migrate to that. And then they can swap their implementation to ESM and remove the replaced namespace entry point where they use the function as their root. But the point is that migration path needs to exist. It shouldn't be a hard cut.
Okay. So then I feel like my conclusion from hearing just this small selection of definitions of what does transparent interop mean to each of us is that we don't have one single definition, and yet we throw around the term a lot. What do people think about creating a glossary?
So that was the first point that we had today.
Oh, okay.
Sorry,
I missed that.
We're covered.
I think in this case, a lot of it just comes up with when we were doing the use cases. A lot of people lumped use cases into the transparent interop case anytime something had anything remotely to do with interop. So
I know we've captured it in the use cases, but I still feel like we do a lot of backsliding, going over the same ground because of not having well-defined terms for each of these.
I think one of the interesting things about this too, based on what you're saying, Wesley, is that like, and this has been one of my critiques of transparent interop for a little while, is that we only really have like unidirectional transparent interop, in the sense that we can only transparently import right now. Whereas in the CommonJS world, the only way we have to get CommonJS packages is via dynamic import.
Right. That's what I was trying to bring up with my use cases. Like that's a hard break for the CommonJS ecosystem. That's really bad.
Yeah, and what the thing that I find interesting is we've spent a lot of time discussing something like named exports of CommonJS, when in my personal opinion, import meta require, really good error messages. Like there's lots of different ways that we can handle it. We actually have a plethora of ways, but we haven't spent a ton of time digging into the flip side, which is how do we make it easier for people to bring ESM into Common? And that primarily has to do with the problems with zebra banding due to the async.
Can I just hold back? We're getting into a lot of technical detail, and we haven't even agreed on terms we're discussing. And there are good things here. We do need to talk about the transitions, but yeah. Right now, I'm just trying to get people to like talk about what it is so we can define these terms offline, because we're here in a meeting and we have limited time.
Yeah.
So Guy, you had your hand up a long time ago and it's up again. So what do you want to say?
Sorry, I lowered it because I didn't want to distract, but I think, I mean, if we're talking about terms in transparent interop, I think it's very important that we're super clear on these terms, and like that we can define it in a technical way, as opposed to some kind of user story way. I guess I would side with the first two definitions of transparent interop, and what Wes was describing sounds a little bit more to me like a migration, a seamless migration path or something like that, or a use cases around that, and refining those use cases, which seems to me a slightly separate discussion.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, I think it's more like it's really a family of issues or family of features, like you were saying, like ESM importing CommonJS importing ESM, blah 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 blah. It's like a whole set of things that probably are a whole bunch of different things to define, and which would be good to have them all listed out rather than one huge definition of of transparent interop, all these subcategories of it. But the other thing I was going to say is, I don't understand why this is phrased as like a giant decision to be made. Like, wouldn't we just want to support as much transparent interop as we can that the spec allows, and then hopefully find things like loaders or whatever else to cover as many other use cases as we can?
I don't think so, actually, because there's multiple kinds of interop that we have to worry about. And a lot of the conversations that we have are focused on CommonJS and ESM interop, but there's lots of other goals coming, whether it be WebAssembly or HTML modules or potentially binary AST. And when we start talking about interop, one of the things I'm personally very interested in is Node and Web interop. And that's where when we start talking about transparent interop for goals that are not supported by the platform, we actually create inconsistencies in Node that break our ability to have Node and Web interop. And that's just a motivation for me of not necessarily having transparent interop in all of the places. But one thing I'm hearing right now, and maybe this is a good meta issue that we can open, is what is our transition story? Like, because I think the biggest thing that everyone wants to avoid is fragmenting our ecosystem. And so all of these features, all of these approaches that we're talking about are really all serving the ultimate use case of A, how do people who are using ESM continue to consume CommonJS modules that have not upgraded? And on the flip side, how do people who are writing CommonJS start to continue being able to consume modules as they upgrade without them being a poison pill. And I think that is kind of the biggest thing that we're trying to solve for. And the fun part is in Common, we actually have a lot more flexibility in doing things because we're not adherent to the standard of the ESM, but we are limited by fundamental technological barriers. But we don't need to dig into those immediately right now, but perhaps that can be kind of the meta thing that consumes a handful of these use cases if people think that's reasonable.
So yeah, we only have 2 minutes. Does anybody else have something they want to speak up about transparent interop? Okay, I am voting myself on to helping with terminology decisions. And so we're going to work on that together. Anybody else who is very interested in transparent interop and has specific definitions they want, we should get together and you can contact me. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, we have 1 minute left. I don't know how much we'll accomplish out of that, but looks like there's also a time box item for private discussions, which will happen afterwards.
I think we don't need to worry about that anymore.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, I can give you all a minute back if there's.
Can Miles talk about whatever's happening with the modules meeting next week during the summit, and if that's going to be something that remote people can attend or whatnot?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'll have my computer. We'll have internet. I'll try to set it up so that people can dial in. We can use a Hangouts or something. I'll post it on the modules issue tracker. To be honest, I've just been running around and super busy, so I haven't planned it out too much. But it's going to be, a bunch of us will be there. We do have the time. I will post that on the issue tracker after this meeting.
Cool. All right. Well, now it's time.
Thanks.
Thanks for attending, y'all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
I'm waving at the screen, but no one can see me. So.
I'm ending.
Congrats, Miles.